Hit record. All right, thanks again for being flexible with us, and apologies for the confusion last week, but here we are on Monday, November 7th for our executive committee meeting for the budget for our fiscal year 23, ma'am. Again, it's the executive committee, but certainly encourage everyone to participate. And the way that this will go, we'll review all of this, and then hopefully the executive committee will be able to make a recommendation by the end of this meeting, or have some to-dos to look into, such that we'll have a follow-up meeting with the entire committee or the entire members group in December for a vote ahead of 2023. So with that, I will do, we'll do, I guess, roll call to order and introductions. So I'll start. Gretchen Young, City of Dover, and I am a voting member of the executive committee. Vote. Suzanne?
Suzanne Woodland, Deputy City Manager, City of Portsmouth, voting member.
Katie Ambrose, Deputy City Manager, City of Rochester, and I'm a voting member.
Jennifer Perry, Public Works Director in Exeter, voting member.
Dennis Messier, representing Newington, and a voting member.
Jamie McCarty, City of Portsmouth, not a voting member.
We've got a small enough group today that I'm just going to ask everyone to introduce themselves. So
Colin Mozzo, Director of Piscataqua Region Assurance Partnership, not a voting member.
Melissa Bailey, Great Bay Piscataqua Waterkeeper with Conservation Law Foundation, representing the stakeholder committee, and I'm not a voting member.
I'm Mel Cote with EPA Region 1 in Boston, and I'm not a voting member.
I'm Jamie Houle, Director of the Unique Stormwater Center, not a voting member.
great. And then Clifton, do you want to quick introduce yourself? Again, it's just such a small group.
Clifton Bell with Brown and Caldwell, working with NAM, and not a voting member.
Great. And Steve?
Good morning, Steve Kuchar, New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services, Coastal Program, not a voting member.
Thanks for joining us, Steve. And Jim?
Hi, Jim Steinkraus, Roth Young Pignatelli, not a voting member.
Great, thank you. All right, so then we will dive into our annual contributions discussion. Before we do that, I did send something out last Friday, and I think it's helpful to see. So there were two, actually a lot of material that got sent out, but the first thing I wanted to go over was two of the spreadsheets. The first one, which has 2022, and then if you got it online, it had colors associated with it, but it had our 2022 budget and then some potential 2023 ones. Of course, those are all subject to discussion, but I just put them in there based on the tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 of the priority work. You can see last year our total budget was $422,805. Exeter was working separately last year, so they were not contributing, even though they were members and partners with all of us. They were still working separately. Now Exeter will be part of the, I guess, the divvy up of the funding. So you can see how these potential new numbers, they're all higher, but how it kind of relates to your community. So I just thought that was helpful for everyone to see. And then the other spreadsheet that I gave, which again, it's just kind of an interesting thing, would be those same three numbers. So the potential three numbers for 2023 and what it would look like across all of the regulated communities. So, you know, I'll just use Rochester as an example, but for the 428,100, which is just a number, it would go from 104,000 of a Rochester contribution down to around 80,000. So just kind of giving a sense of what that would look like if we did have the full group participating. And I know that groups of communities like Somersworth are participating separately, but just thought I'd share those things. other pieces that were, that you should have had a chance to see, we have the prep monitoring work, the Brown and Caldwell Professional Services, and PTAP continued work. And actually, I think for discussion, I would like to start with PTAP. Jamie, can we put you on the spot, do you think? Do you mind? All right, then we'll start with the PTAP one. Okay, so last year we funded $50,000, and it looks like you're looking for, again, with the $50,000.
Yeah,
You want to talk through that?
the purpose will be about the same. It'll be getting communities on board. Most communities have filled out information on PTAP. Those that have, last meeting, we showed the annual reports that we can develop, tracking nitrogen reduction from structural and non-structural BMPs. So we'll continue to do that and continue to work with communities that haven't quite onboarded yet to get them up to speed. So we have worked with Milton and Rollinsford to get kind of the information that's in the Dover, Exeter, and Portsmouth site plan review process. We get that language into their guidance. So as part of the development process, applicants will start putting things into PTAP. And then we're meeting with individuals. We met with Paul a couple of weeks ago just to go over, general responsibilities for the town administrator, and we assigned him as the town administrator. So he's taking over lots of things for Rollinsford, and we'll continue to work with Newington and others that want to come on board.
Did you have luck outside of the MAM communities?
Not yet. I mean, we're focusing on the MAM communities, but we hope that, when is there kind of that letter that you were working on? Has that gone out yet?
It hasn't gone out yet. I'm thinking it'll go out once this is completed.
That's one of the areas. Obviously, we want every community to participate in this. The benefits hopefully will extend to every community. And the other component, in addition to just continuing to work on the database, we did develop a batch import feature that Rochester has used, and we imported, I think there was upwards of 70 different
That's
BMPs.
awesome.
So the next phase is to work with Rochester, and just once they get everything kind of prioritized in the database, to work on the annual report and show them what that means. The second part of this, I think, in addition to updating and continuing with database functionality, is we want to work with a subcommittee from the MAN group to develop a template for an annual report. So I know that annual reporting isn't required, but I know that the information embodied in PTAP is very beneficial to demonstrate all the great work that you're doing. So I think Mel, EPA did discuss possibly an annual report template. We know that from the EPA comments, PTAP really accommodates a lot of what they needed. And it would be great to, I think we could easily in a subcommittee fashion, much like we do in the coalition, Seacoast Dormant Coalition, develop a template that we could create for all communities to use. So that's in there. And then I don't know if Zach got. The last component is one thing that PTAP doesn't do well is track long-term land use changes. And that's mainly because, it's sort of hard to do at a regional level too. You think of what your de minimis conditions are for permitting, and everybody's is different. It's anywhere from 5,000 square feet of disturbance all the way up to an acre. And so that we can only track what we have data for. So speaking to the long-term land use change and the land use change patterns, how are we dealing, how are we doing from year to year with respect to impervious cover and, other land uses that obviously cause and contribute to pollution in the Great Bay. We'd like to do this regionally through GIS efforts. So we have been working, EPA through the ORD process is developing hydrologic response unit mapping for the entire bay. And we've been in discussions with them to do that. And we're experimenting with different land use data sets that are widely available. And so the plan is to do that and update it for 2016 all the way up to the latest set that we have, which is 2020. Once we get that down, not only will we be able to update that as new land use data sets become available and new impervious cover, which we do have at a 1 meter resolution for almost the entire drainage area, thanks to PrEP. We can start to develop land use change statistics based on community. And that will be, to me, I think that'll be the most accurate depiction of the land use change trends. We can track that in PTAP, but it's a lot more effective and more accurate at a regional GIS level. So we hope to do that kind of in the background, and hopefully that will appeal to a lot of EPA's concerns just about, what are the land use change trends? And it's no mystery. We think we know what they are. We're not seeing increases in forest or increases in open space, So it's one of those things that we hope to work with communities to focus on very directly on the things that you're doing and getting the appropriate credits for the structural and non-structural best management practices that you're implementing, and then work in the GIS community with some of these higher end kind of modeling efforts to get a sense of, where the trend is going. So I think that's about it. It continues to be fun and exciting, and it's great. We have a lot of things in the database, thanks to all the communities that are putting things in there.
Great, open it up to questions for Jamie. Well, I'll ask the question that I just kind of want to get it out there, because I think we talked about it in years past, is eventually the hope would be that this would perhaps have a charge per input or something like that. And I don't think we're there yet either. So I feel really comfortable about that, but I don't know if you want to talk about that just to make sure that we address it.
Yeah, we do have early on, and I would say we probably haven't addressed this for at least the last 3 years, but there was a subcommittee within the PTAP group around the sustainability.
Right.
And we have the beginnings of that work, and we didn't get too much past, envisioning some different models. One of them would be pay per use, so it would be a charge possibly during the permitting process. It would be probably an annual recovery fee per community that's using it. But it's something that we really need to reinvigorate, I think, because right now the database is housed at UNH, and we pay UNH Research Computing annually to do the upkeep, but it doesn't have to be housed there. And more communities could potentially use this. So it's something that I'd like to get started again, but we've been focusing on the operation.
Yeah, no, fair. And I would say also, I think once if MS4 requires better reporting or this in the next 5 years has more strict requirements, people are going to have to figure out how to implement it.
It seems that the indications from EPA is that tracking and accounting is going to be becoming much more required, not just for the Great Bay Total Nitrogen General Permit, but I mean, we saw what recently happened in urban Massachusetts with the 3 watersheds that experienced the RDA. It's not, the tracking and accounting requirements aren't getting less.
Yep.
So
Thank you. Right, any other questions for Jamie? Okay,
Would it be helpful to make a motion to include 50,000 for PTAB for purposes of budgeting, just so we can know that that is our nut?
yep, I like that.
To make that motion,
I
I'll
made
second.
that motion,
Okay.
and you've seconded, Dennis has seconded.
Okay. We do not need to roll call, so we'll just do any discussion. We'll do all those in favor of placeholder of 50,000 for PTAP? Aye. All right, that's unanimous. Thank you. All right, next. Because, do you actually, Suzanne or Jamie, do you have any update on website costs?
So Ellen, can you-
I think I saw it.
okay. My recollection is it was a little over $100 a month for hosting. From the original estimate. So I'd say if you put 5,000, that would certainly be more than enough to get us.
Yeah.
You know, if we have additional costs standing up the website. So we have been meeting to stand up independent man website. And in fact, I know that Alan Brady is trying to schedule a meeting on Thursday, I think, by Zoom to go over the wireframe, so the initial kind of layout of the website, so it is moving forward.
Yes, it is.
So I think 5,000 would be more than enough to get us over the finish line and hopefully carrying the hosting fee.
Yeah.
For that year.
Too. Dennis?
Want to do the same thing, I'll make a
Yep.
motion to
Dennis.
approve $5,000 for website.
Second,
Second by Suzanne. Any discussion? All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Big thanks to Portsmouth for running with that. That'll be good to have that going.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm gonna do Brown and Caldwell next, just because prep is kind of the biggest piece. So let's dive into Brown and Caldwell's contract. Clifton, I'm hoping this one, I think with good reason, we'll talk to Clifton, but you'll see this one is an up from last year. We had a $50,000 in the budget for Brown and Caldwell. And I think we're leaning on them a lot. They're providing great service to all of us. It has gone up a little bit, so hoping Clifton, you can talk a little bit about that.
I can, and just start out saying really appreciate working with MAM. This is a fun project, very interesting science. I really enjoy working on this project and appreciate the chance to continue this if you all decide to approve our budget for next year. But if you've seen the scope of services, it is an increase from last year. There are three major tasks. One is the smaller task, the obligatory project management and administration task. But the meatier task are tasks to the meeting participation. And that's a lot of what we did this year, participating in a number of different groups, the TAC, the Eelgrass Resilience Eelgrass Resilience Project. A lot of time with Kala, and I should have said that up front as well too. I think I really appreciate Kala, and I think we've had a good relationship with Kala on this, and appreciate the way that he helps us help MAM. So a lot of that is going to be similar, but we think that the level of activity is going to be certainly as much as it was this year, if not more, in terms of the number and types of meetings. Some of those are these official standing groups, and others are smaller meetings that we have every once in a while on particular issues. And then task 3 is a very generally worded as needed technical support task, somewhat generally worded to include a lot of different things on purpose, because we don't always know exactly what we'll be doing the next year, but things like literature reviews, independent analyses of the data that's coming out of the monitoring that we're doing, reviewing documents, and developing recommendations, and just participating in the whole process. So, in terms of increase, the increase, part of that is, better understanding from this year about the overall level of effort, anticipating a lot of activity next year. But we also, in our overall timeline, as we shift from, doing a lot of the monitoring to begin to interpret that data for, ultimately, regulatory purposes and non-regulatory purposes, but drawing the major scientific conclusions out of those data that really matter. We feel like, next year is when, there's going to be more of that. It will not end next year, but it will begin next year. Some of that intensive interpretation. So we do anticipate and want to be prepared for, higher level of review and, independent data analyses to support the conclusions and support MAM's participation in the overall process. So that last year's budget was about 50K. We're proposing up to 77 for next year. So I will pause there and see if there are any questions or comments on what we put in front of you.
Thank you for going through that. Any questions for Clifton?
Yes, Clifton, this is Jennifer Perry at Exeter. Is there any kind of a report or just like a progress report that Brown and Caldwell provides at any point? I realize time goes on, here we are, it's already a year in and we're talking about next year. I just wonder what the reportables are.
Would you like me to answer that, or did
Yeah,
somebody
go
else?
ahead. I've seen some of the stuff that's prepared even today, but go ahead and answer that, Clifton. That'd be great.
Yeah, so one of the things that we've done each year that we've worked on this has been put together materials on the recommended monitoring recommendations for the forthcoming year. And so you've seen a version of that. It's a little more streamlined this year in terms of tables of the number 1, number 2, number 3 priority recommendations. Other than that, it tends to be more on a kind of a as needed basis for particular activities. So one of the things that we worked together with COLA and prep on this year was a template for describing proposed monitoring projects, so that we're at this when we're at this stage of decision making, we have a pretty good understanding, if not a full work plan, but a good idea of what the work would be, what the timeline would be, what the deliverable would be, and COLA has been kind of put the time in to provide those templates so that we have them today. And then it's been other deliverables or related to interviewing individual reports would be the comments on those reports. What we have not typically produced is, say, a year-end report saying this is everything we did this year and kind of overall status of how we see things stand with the project. That's a possibility. I think if folks were interested in that kind of thing.
So yeah, some of the biggest pieces of work they've done is comments on reports, which I mean, I wouldn't want to post them really to like a website. I mean, you can, but so I guess we could work on distributing stuff like that a little bit better.
Yeah, well, for this year, for example, a lot of the work was on reviewing sections of the State of the Estuaries report, and I think there were probably reasons for keeping a lot of those individual comments within the sausage making process of that report, and having the more widely distributed written document be the the revised report, but how others feel about that.
And then similarly, when you're doing payment requests from Rochester, you're putting down hours spent, and it's not a deliverable, it's sort of just an accounting. I think we could potentially try and add a year-end summary piece. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm not asking for a major effort that again would contribute to the costs.
Right.
It's just making sure that we have something that we can point to that kind of defines what was accomplished
Yep.
in
I
the
think
year.
that's-
And it could be a simple 2-pager or even one of the tables that was prepared, kind of checking off that this was completed. I just think it would be helpful for our understanding of where efforts are being expended.
We could certainly do that, and I can add that to this scope of work that we will provide a concise summary like that. I say we have done some of that. Now that I think about it, it's been more on emails. It's been emails, kind of reporting progress. But we could make it a kind of a year-end concise deliverable in the scope of work.
Yeah, that sounds good, Clifton. That's right. You've done that a lot along the way. But I think it would be nice to have something clean that can be distributed, posted on MAM, something that we can take to our funder, powers that be.
We'll do that.
I
Yeah,
agree
Dennis.
with that, because we need to have, somebody said, what is Brown and Caldwell do?
Right,
I mean, we can show them this, but what is it they actually do?
right.
Whether it's the emails or something.
Yep. Yep, I think that's a good idea.
I concur. I think that makes sense now that we've kind of gotten into a rhythm here and there's been great work product. It's been helpful to have Clifton kind of give the summary of the funding priorities and how they're looking at the requests that are coming from PrEP. So I find it very valuable, but a concise summary, just 1 or 2 pages with maybe an attachment or 2, if that's useful, might be good, because we could easily put that under the resources document, just a section of the website, just to give some history. So, thank you, Jennifer.
Yeah, I think we'll
All right.
have that. All right, any other questions? Yep,
So
Dennis,
technically,
go.
on the cost, I see on the last page, it says $77,000 to 192. So what do we budget? 192?
No, it's 77,000. Correct me if I'm wrong, Clifton, but 77,000 this year, and then it would be an addition to ongoing. They started their contract with just Rochester, and then expanded it, so it would take them to 192 total through the whole, all the time.
So there'd be a motion this year to add 77,000 to the next year's budget for Brown and Caldwell services.
I'll second.
All right. All right, any discussion?
Kate seconded, right?
She did. She beat you to it. All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, that's unanimous. Great, okay. Now to our biggest nut to crack, is gonna be the PTAP. PrEP work. And I will leave that up to Colin. Do you want to walk through it, or do you want to kind of go with Clifton?
I would say, start with Clifton and then defer to you all to see if you have questions,
Okay,
because otherwise I risk droning on and on
that's fair.
about these things.
That's fair. So speaking of deliverables, this was, so Clifton has worked for months really with, Culla to review some of the proposed, costs and projects and ideas for this year. And has put together, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 deliverables. So that's what this spreadsheet is, with this list. And so I'm going to turn it over to Clifton, if you're there, to walk us through and help us understand what's on the plate.
Okay. Well, good. So we did work with Culla and PrEP pretty closely. The breaking this up into 3 tables, that was our work working with the MAM, small number of MAM representatives to prioritize. So before we dive into the individual studies, just the structure of what you see before you is 3 tables: priority group 1, priority group 2, and priority group 3. This is not like good studies, middling studies, and bad studies. These are all good studies. If there was a bad study table, that would be table 4, but it would be empty because these all have value in some way. And of course, it's always a judgment call a little bit, you know, as to how you prioritize them. And I'll try to describe it this way. Priority 1 being, you know, some of the core monitoring, the studies that or efforts that, you know, regardless of where we go on the science, what stressors turned out to be really important. This is the type of information that you need to put together the big picture. You know, the water quality monitoring, the light monitoring, and also the storm add-on, which we believe is filling a key data gap. It's a little bit more difficult to choose between priority group 2 and priority group 3, but one way to put it would be priority group 2 was kind of a mix of things that we felt like were some things that might be even, you know, more of very specific interest to MAM, maybe, you know, maybe even a little more time sensitive, where you'd want to start them earlier, and things that you know, of enough interest to MAM that you know, some other projects that for which there might be, you know, other funding sources might then fall to 3. And you know, we did go back a little bit forth with Culla on this. So, you know, he has other funding sources, and I will defer to him, you know, to the extent that, you know, we get into the individual projects, and you know, he might say, well, you know, we have already got another funding source for this other project, so, you know, we wouldn't need to fund that anyway. In terms of the total funding recommendation, we weren't not going to presume how much funding would be available. It basically came down to saying priority, you know, recommending funding for priority 1 and 2. So those first 2 tables, and that from the, you know, assuming some modest level increase from the funding level from last year. And if it got to the point where you had additional funds, it could fund table 3. You know, those are some good things as well. And we could talk about which of those might be the higher priority. I'll pause there just to see if there's any question on kind of how this was structured before we see how much you'd like to talk about the individual elements of these tables.
So this is Suzanne. It's my recollection that we kind of reviewed the substance of some of this, these studies and kind of pros and cons of the studies, maybe like 2 months ago or so when we were in Newington. So this is like a further evolution of that initial discussion, sort of in late summer.
Yeah, out of that discussion, you know, the small group of representatives, you know, basically trying to tee this up for MAM. You know, Gretchen, Katie, you know, the representatives, you know, pretty small group, but you know, made some decisions in that about, you know, some preliminary decisions about what to put in front of the group. And this reflects that discussion, and that's why the studies that you see under tables, you know, that's why the studies are in the tables they're in.
When there's time, I have a comment.
Please.
Clifton, first of all, I would like to echo what Clifton said about the value of this working relationship. Working with Brown and Caldwell, and it's not just Clifton, it's Stacy and Dan, has proven real value to prep. And although you can't see it, I think it's real value to the communities as well.
Mm-hmm.
We have excellent conversations. They see things that I don't see.
Mm-hmm.
They bring up really good questions that our external experts from, you know, Judd Kenworthy, Brian Howes, and Simon Courtney then puzzle over. And so it's been really, really great. And they're also extremely professional to work with, I have to say. So thanks to Clifton and your group for everything. Since we last spoke, Clifton, there have been a couple of things that have arisen that I want to
Great.
share with the group. First of all, in table 3, tier 3 seagrass is now being paid for through the bipartisan infrastructure law funding that we're getting.
Awesome.
The row just beneath that, however, is not being paid for by any other means currently. And I don't know how we would pay for it. And I believe that the communities would really benefit, because what this allows Tom Gregory, who services all the songs that are out and collecting data every 15 minutes and also doing grab samples where it's mostly about the data sonde program. He needs more sondes and more probes. Sometimes you don't remove the whole song, you just swap out a probe. Oh, we need a new dissolved oxygen probe. So this equipment is really, really valuable, because what we're doing now is we're expanding the number of stations, right? Because we had no money in a couple of years ago, before the money started to rain, we had to stop going to Coastal Marine Lab at the mouth of the harbor. We stopped sampling there. We'd like to put that one back online. We had to stop sampling in Salmon Falls. We had to stop sampling at the lower Piscataqua. That we did a long time ago, again, because we just didn't have any money. So now we're talking about bringing those back on. And everybody agrees that those are really important. But that 20K would be really, really valuable to enable that program. The other thing that we're doing, and a number of people have said this is important, is we generally stop sampling January, February, and March. And given what we discussed about this weekend and how we're playing golf and in some cases laying out in lawn chairs, like that can't continue, right? It's a new world. And so we can't say, oh, everything's frozen January, we don't need to sample anymore. And that's what that's about as well. So it would be awesome if that was something that you would consider funding. Is that okay, Clifton?
Yes, yeah, and if we got into that table 3 discussion, I was definitely going to highlight that as, you know, rising to the top. I was kind of assuming you're going to find another funding source for tier 3. But you know, the additional sondes, you know, in fact, it seems like because it's going, I don't know how much of that actually could have been included in that, the very top row of table 1, as just kind of part and parcel of the estuary water quality monitoring effort. But I don't know if you know, that already increased a little bit because of additional sites. I don't know if you felt like you had to break it out separately, so to avoid, you know, too much of an increase in one area, but you know, those two somewhat go together.
The other reason that they're separate, I think, Clifton, is that the other is really a lot about work, operations and maintenance and analysis. This is equipment purchase that could continue to be used. The life of these sondes is generally, I think, 8 to 10 years. So it's a little bit different in that way. It's more of a straight equipment purchase.
Okay. Last year, we did fund the Muscle Watch program.
I will say that the Muscle Watch program is being bumped up to $40,000, and it's getting that money from the infrastructure funding.
So that's kind of off this plate then?
Yeah, Steve Jones, who does this work, would say, oh, I could use that 10K, but it's
Yeah,
not
no,
planned
that's
for.
fair.
In other words, I would, if there was a table 4 of, hey, you're feeling amazingly charitable,
Okay.
Muscle Watch would go there.
Okay, good to know, thank you.
Yep.
And the shoreline hardening survey?
So actually, I think Clifton was the one who reminded me that that is something that we had wanted to do. The last one was done around 2014, 2015 by someone working with Steve Kucher's shop at the Department of Environmental Services. And it's extremely important. Monitoring shoreline hardening has a huge impact on the habitats. And Clifton was the one who said, hey, you know, I think that's something the MAM would be interested in if, you know, if we want to put it in the table 3. Clifton, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, this is one that's going to be kind of tempting to always say, you know, this is important, but we don't need to do it this year. And then if enough years go by, then you just haven't done it, and it is important. So it, you know, it's in table 3 mainly because it's something that you know, you don't necessarily have to do immediately. But, you know, I do think we want to fund this eventually, if not next year.
Well, it sounds like this is the year to do it, if we don't have to pick up the tier 3 seagrass and the mussel wash. This would be the year to do that.
I would agree.
And wasn't this a request, wasn't this a request last year that we?
Yeah, we talked about it last year too. Yep.
And has there been a baseline done, or would this be the
The
baseline?
baseline was in 2015.
Okay.
14 or 15.
16.
16, thanks, Steve.
Yeah, sorry, can I ask a question? Just real quick, or a point? So I know there's going to be another LiDAR set done that's going to be topobathy, high resolution, being done by NOAA. And I believe it's going to be done this year. So I guess a question for Clifton and for Kala, would that be more valuable when you're trying to update this data set? Because it's basically a GIS exercise. And depending on how comprehensive you're going to do, it's not that big of a lift, but just wanted to know if that topobathy data set would be helpful or not.
Are you talking about in general or for the shoreline study, Steve?
Shoreline.
I actually don't know the answer to that. LiDAR is, I don't know if it's LiDAR, perhaps you could tell us, Steve, or somebody else who's listening in, if LiDAR would enable you to see, oh, that's riprap or natural, because that's really what we're talking about here is, you know, a lot of people are going to combat erosion in different ways, but what we're looking for is the way they're doing it. So the inventory helps you understand, well, how much of this is like vertical walls, or, you know, it's riprap at an angle versus somebody maybe like they've done at Wagon Hill, they actually put in salt marsh. So it's a natural methodology, which everybody is saying is the way to go these days. So afraid I can't answer that. Steve, maybe that's, you have somebody in your shop who can get back to us on that.
Yeah, nice pushback. But I'm not the one proposing the work. But as a follow-up, I think it's valuable. You can do it with the base LiDAR. It was just a question more for Clifton, if there's something that they wanted to consider or not. It could be helpful in some instances where it'd be, if there's more expansive work that has been done, which we really haven't permitted that much in that time frame. So I think the current LiDAR we have would be sufficient and good enough to update the baseline. And to an extent, Great Bay was the least, had the least amount of shoreline armoring, Great Bay proper. So I can't imagine that there'll be too much that they'll need to update for Great Bay proper.
Yeah, well, thanks for raising that. We will give it a little more thought as to how the two might work. My initial impression is they don't necessarily need to be joined at the hip, but
Yeah, I would concur.
Okay. All right.
So, can I ask if, I don't know if you have the spreadsheet, I was doing some quick math. So if the mayor were to approve all of the projects, taking out the tier 3 seagrass and the mussel wash, do you have a breakdown of what that is by the communities that are actually the MAM communities? Because this has it.
Yeah, you should have 2 spreadsheets, Suzanne. No, it's okay, you're right. I did share one with everyone. No, not that one. Give her. Give it to you with mine.
What did I miss? Oh, this one?
This one, yep. And if you looked, there's one that folks got that had color. And of course, it doesn't have color when we print it, but so yeah, I did put that in. So that brings us to 568,450. And remember, last year we were 422,805. This year Exeter is participating with us, so so it really changes that. So that goes, I'll use Rochester's numbers. Last year they were a 120 contribution, and with doing everything that we just talked about, it would be 138,801. Portsmouth is got Keys and Portsmouth, so 169,155 plus 33,113. So I can do that for you.
Got it.
Dover is 129,694. It's up from 112 last year. Newington was just under 7,000 last year, and it would be 8,000 this year, so up, that'd be up $1,000. Rollinsford was 3,600 last year, and would be 4,100 this year, and Milton would go from 2,400 to 2,700. And Exeter would be a contribution of 82,783.
Helpful, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
I'll make an additional comment.
Sure.
I was just looking into Steve's question, and the main thing they used when they did this, it was published in 2016, as Steve said, was an aerial overflight for which the primary purpose was mapping eelgrass.
Yes.
We have gone to using other methods, but next year we are going to do an aerial overflight.
Mhm,
We're not using man money for that
mhm,
because that's very valuable when you're mapping salt marshes.
mhm.
So it works really well if we want to do the shoreline next year. Because at the very least, we have the exact same technology they used last time,
Mhm.
and perhaps the LiDAR can be used in addition.
Okay, so they maybe make sense to pull that 15,000 out. Which,
Well, to do it.
To
to do it, oh, to do it next year.
Right.
Oh,
Yeah.
sorry, I was thinking the following year. Okay,
Oh, I mean, it could be either way, because it'll be flown next year.
I
and then They
like-
could actually.
I like
it's up
this.
to
I'm
you.
sorry, I misunderstood what you were saying, but that
Yeah.
makes much more sense. Sorry.
I have a follow-up question on that. Does that affect the cost of tier 1 seagrass monitoring? Because you said you weren't using man money for that overflight.
So Clifton, it doesn't affect it. I think what'll happen is that right this year, because we didn't have an aerial overflight, there were some areas where we only used like satellite. And then we had to send the field verification boat crew out to all these different places. If we can get that flight done, and it's an if, that's why we moved to using drones more, is it's getting harder and harder to find that perfect day where you have low tide, no cloud cover and everything. Then this is going to be basically more data to make those maps even better. But I wouldn't say it's a switch one for the other. Does that make sense?
It does. So
They're complementary.
it doesn't reduce that 75K of tier grass C1 monitoring to have that flight.
It's possible that it could lead to less field verification work, but the problem is we don't know if it's even going to happen. So I wouldn't want to tell you that you can budget less, because then we might come to you and say, hey, we can't get the work done because we weren't able to make that flight. There have been a couple of years where we never were able to actually fly the flight.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Well, speaking of Katie, were there, or Cully, you might know the answer. Were there any pockets from last year that went relatively undrawn from? I mean, is there any surplus?
The only one I can recall is there was $5,000 to work with folks to come up with a scope that it ended up on your table one, the $91,000 for stormwater. But the people who worked on that scope didn't end up asking for that.
Yeah.
But we're gonna basically say to them, hey, it's here if you want it.
Okay.
You know,
Okay,
I'm glad you asked that question, because I was going to say that, I don't have it today because we're still getting invoices coming in.
Yeah.
By the time of the final vote, I should have a pretty good picture on what's available from the funds that were already budgeted, including from 2021.
perfect.
So I think we could look at this today as kind of the maximum not to exceed.
Yep.
Knowing that we might have some available funds that we could offset a
Okay.
little bit of it.
Perfect. Awesome. All right.
You know, I have a few comments just on some of the individual things on the study that may be less familiar to man because they may be new.
Thank you.
Is-
Yeah.
Okay, so, in table 1, the storm add-on to the eelgrass stressor project, this is something new. And this is something that would, is a Bill McDowell project, but we feel like it's filling an important data gap. We have water quality monitoring, we have sondes deployed in different locations. But what we, one data gap is, under wet weather events, under storm events, how does some of those factors, particularly that affect light attenuation, like turbidity, but others as well, nitrogen DOC as well, how does that work its way through the system? How long does it hang around? And so this is deploying some sensors, in 3 locations at the, upper end of head of tide, that can then be used in combination with, information elsewhere in the estuary to answer some of those questions and understand how much, residual turbidity from storms might be a component of our overall light attenuation. It's a 2-year project. This is the funding for the first year of that.
Okay.
In table 2, turbidity monitoring, that looks like it might overlap, but it's actually a very different kind of work. This is continued work by Atsushi Matsuoka, also at UNH, and it's combined use of looking at historical monitoring data, but also additional new monitoring leading towards a bio-optical model to help predict and even hindcast what are the major factors affecting light attenuation in the system through the water column. How much of it is algal, how much of it is background water quality from organic carbon, how much of it is suspended solids. We think that's going to be an important tool for diagnosis. And the item just below that, the macrodynamic synthesis and recommendations, this is also a new item. This is something that Brown and Caldwell recommended that PREP has agreed could be valuable. And this is kind of like we did with, or are doing with turbidity sediment this year. It's more of a retrospective. You're looking at past data source, existing data sources, and also the literature on macroalgal dynamics. And one of the reasons that Brown and Caldwell had suggested this is that we certainly see a kind of a conceptual model in development with ongoing studies, and macroalgae as part of that as a potentially important stressor on designated uses, including eelgrass. However, we felt like that there was some information on the macroalgae. This is the seaweed in terms of a potential competitor for light with eelgrass. And if so, it could be decisions on how much it is or is not a stressor. And the second part of that is how much it could or could not be controlled with nutrients or additional controls. To be so important to the overall,
It is really important. Yeah.
what we're doing here, that we really felt like, we shouldn't, we might have data gaps here to fill in terms, this stuff can kind of come and go. We don't want to just be relying on a little bit of data and say anecdotal types of information as we saw this, we saw that. And I don't want to mischaracterize as that's all we have, but this was a, something to take a hard look at. What do we have? And hopefully, maybe some of those literature-based questions as, how has this behaved elsewhere? What kind of nutrient conditions would affect its growth? And maybe lead towards some additional monitoring in the future. Now, the 25K might be a little higher for that. We didn't necessarily think, because it is kind of a paper study. Maybe it could be lower than that, but we didn't want to shortchange it. We wanted to make sure there was enough, and if we put this out to an RFP, that it would be enough to make people's worth it their while to respond to it, but make it comprehensive. I'll give Carl a chance to say anything about that he would like to, and then see if there's any questions on that particular item.
I agree with Clifton. I appreciate that Brown and Caldwell recommended this. I've been very happy that we have really increased the amount of data we're collecting on seaweed. And so I was sort of blind to the fact that this new good level that we have gotten ourselves to still has a lot of data gaps, right? I was focused on, dang, we weren't collecting this 3 to 4 years ago. We weren't going out to 25 sites throughout the estuary and sending divers down there. At 8 sites, we're doing it in April and October as well as peak. And so I felt really good about that, but it made me blind to the fact that, hey, this stuff, because it's not attached, that's the problem. The seaweed isn't attached.
Right. Which is
So
the problem.
you can go out there and go, oh, look, this the western part of Great Bay is covered with, that could just be because the wind blew it all over there, or it could be that it kind of resides there. So there's this time and space issue that I think that this work will help us. And lots of people are struggling with this, and nobody has, as far as I know, nobody has the silver bullet for how to study, because seaweeds grow so fast, and they die so fast, and they're not attached, that it's a huge challenge. So I really appreciate that Clifton brought this up.
Yeah, no.
I kind of a comment on a question, which is, when EPA approved New Hampshire's 303B list, assessing water quality and listing impaired waters back in the spring, there were a couple segments in the Piscataqua and I think in Little Bay for which DES was unable to make determination based on basically insufficient data. They go into what's called category 3. Category 5 is where impaired waters go. And we questioned that lack of determination, and we encouraged and spoke with the state about getting macroalgae data that would, because that's sort of one of the variables that plays in, but they weren't really able to consider it because we didn't have a methodology on which to sort of use it as part of their various lines of evidence that they use. And so I'm not sure if this is a response to that, because we were saying, yes, you should go out and do this monitoring. I don't know if that's what fed into this proposal or whether it was entirely independent, but I would just say that it's super important that I think DES would be it's important that that work's being done so it can be considered, whether it's in the 2024 or the 2026 listing cycle, it's every 2 years. But we're very glad to see that this is being proposed.
Great. Hey, Steve, I don't know if you're there. Funny, I can't see anybody. Let's see if
Sally's on.
Is Sally on the hot seat. Steve, that's okay. That's a good question. That's okay. Steve might not know the answer off the top of his head, but it is a good question. So we can follow up with,
I might not. If it's a seaweed question about DES.
Yeah.
What's the question? Oh, what the one that
Is this a response to the DES talk with?
Yeah.
No, and Clifton, tell me if you agree, but I think that this came from Brown and Caldwell.
Yeah.
Basically, the thing is that one of the people that works with Clifton is Stacy Villanueva. She works in Tampa Bay, and they have 30 years of experience of dealing with seaweed. The seaweed was so bad in the late 70s that people who lived near the estuary, the paint would peel off their house. because it was basically piled up seaweed was volatilizing in the air and in effect, and people couldn't breathe. So this has the potential to be a huge issue. Tampa Bay has been following this for 30 years. And so Stacy was like, if this is gonna become a huge issue, you're gonna want a little bit more data. I congratulate you for what you're doing, but you might want to even push it further. So I think it's more of a fact that it just coincidentally aligns with what you wanted, Mel. I think it came independently from Brown and Caldwell, and I agree with it. Is that your recollection, Clifton?
Yeah, and you know, the only I would maybe put it, the only thing I would add to that is that if it's a huge issue, yes, but also trying to determine, is this a
Right.
huge issue?
Right. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just, I'm feeling pretty comfortable here in terms of what I've heard, and I know we did cover some of this, I think, at a prior meeting, some of the background on some of this, so really good, and it's kind of honed right down. So I'm comfortable from Portsmouth's perspective, making a motion to approve things, but I didn't know if you wanted stakeholder comment first
good
on
point. Yes, I do.
the recommendations related to this before I make my motion, so I'm just checking
Yes.
for.
Well, I don't feel technically expert enough to comment on the details of what's being proposed, so I guess I would say that I appreciate the suite of questions being addressed in in this proposal, but I would defer on recommending specific proposals and rejecting others.
So I would move to approve the recommended tier 1, tier 2, and then tier 3 projects that include the estuarine water quality monitoring equipment and the shoreline hardening survey, plus the 5% contingency. For a total, I think you told me, of $568,450.
$50, yeah. There's a second. Awesome, Katie second. We've got a motion, any discussion? All right, all those in favor? Aye. Great, thank you, that's unanimous.
Before the next meeting, we'll have an updated one.
Yeah, I'll get an updated one of those.
Members meeting.
And I'll push Steve Kuchar a little bit on that and see what maybe studies they're doing for the 303D response to see if there's any overlap, but I still, this is good work. So actually, we did bounce around a little bit on this. It's always hard to put together an agenda. So we had our stakeholder comment, but I will still, Melissa, do you have any other comments, anything you'd like to see us funding or?
No, again, I remain really deeply impressed by Pam's willingness to step up and ask communities to support so much of this monitoring and research. And I think collectively it adds a tremendous amount of knowledge, and I think that's going to be really useful as we evaluate how this permit is progressing. So
Great.
just a lot of appreciation for your work and support.
Great, thank you. All right, then moving on to item number 4 would be public comment. And I'll open it up to the public. Anyone wishing to add to that?
I can give a quick
Okay, that would be awesome.
update on status of the MS4.
Okay, great.
So right now, we're working sort of on a parallel track on both Massachusetts and New Hampshire municipal separate storm sewer system permits, the reissues. And right now, we're scheduled to issue those drafts next spring. So spring 2023. And stormwater staff wanted me to point out, and probably you all are aware of the fact that the bill funds, I think it's the SRF bill funds have stormwater components that are potentially could be used for permanent compliance, so I wanted to mention that too. Folks are probably already well aware of that. That's it.
Awesome, thank you. All right, then moving on, so annual contribution recommendation, I think we've covered that under item number 2. So I will open it up to other business. There's so much going on, but I think it's fair to just, unless anything pressing, we can move on.
I
Yeah,
would just,
Jamie? Oh, sorry.
I'll just add that,
First.
I was following the Portsmouth sweeper on the way in.
Yeah.
And so, Dover is actively sweeping, and we're also working with UNH to update the sweeping credits. And so we're, after this year, we'll likely develop a calculator and institute those as a optioning for non-structural sweeping operations.
That's awesome. That credit for going green stuff is gonna really help inform where we put funding, right? Where you're gonna get your bang for your buck. So I don't think do we have anything in the queue for another credit for going green project?
No, but it's something to consider.
Yep.
It was part of the kind of advanced funding of PTAP as you identify new either structural or non-structural approaches. We can convene an expert panel to look into it, like fertilizer controls might be a good next. Fertilizer ordinance or regulations. Can we link that to a load reduction for nitrogen?
All right.
Question for Jamie.
Yeah.
On that, Jamie, is there any, is the timing of street sweeping, not so much the frequency, but the timing a factor? Because I've always thought like in the springtime, I know at least where I live, it seems like they wait too long to do the sweeping. So you've got all this sand and crap built up over the winter, and then you get spring showers, and then they come and sweep.
Absolutely.
And so doing it ideally when, hopefully you're not going to get snow, but it's before you get a lot of rain. Is that something that's built in?
Yeah,
The crediting?
the timing is probably the most critical thing that we've learned about. As a lot of Bill Selvig's work, he's at USGS in Wisconsin, showed that 60 to 80% of the actual load deposits in 3 months of the year. And picking that up is really important. Because the dissolve fraction mobilizes very, very quickly. But then you have this legacy of things in the closed drainage network that festers there over years. So, there in our expert panel, we were talking about the possibility of giving too much credit, but I think there's some built-in resilience to, the work that you do now is going to really pay dividends as the closed drainage system gets cleaned up. Not only is it going to operate more effectively, but you're slowly going to clean out what's already ingrained in the pipe. That's kind of probably historically stuff in the outfall. So yeah, timing is critical.
I see Sally, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, just to add on to the question about what kind of panels might be underway. And I'm sorry he's left, Steve Kuchar, but I believe he will be working with PREP, Abigail Lyon, on an effort to develop a list of alternative in-tank treatment technologies for septic systems, similar to what Massachusetts and Florida and New York have. So I believe this panel is going to do a literature search and then vet these different technologies and then develop a list of technologies that we would recommend. I'm not sure who the we would be at this point, but someone we would recommend for use for in-tank treatment technology. So kind of similar to some of the work that Melissa's doing, but this would just be to look at, the universe or the realm of what's available out there, and then look at load reduction estimates for those various treatment technologies, and then develop a list for recommended use here in New Hampshire. Other states have similar lists, so this would be a sort of a panel for us to kind of come up with a list for this state. So I just wanted to add that because that work is going to go on, I believe, in the coming year. So Steve knows more about it, but I think you'll start to see that ramp up soon too. So Thank you.
Sally, do you know if they're gonna have associated load reduction estimates with that?
Yes, so they'll look at just various technologies. I think, Jamie, I've shared the lists from like Massachusetts and Florida and New York with you, because those states have gone through this exercise before because they regulate nitrogen discharge from septic systems within certain distances of certain water bodies. And so those states have kind of done this work of trying to figure out what systems are most effective, and those have removal rates that have been tested independently. So not just going on manufacturers' recommendations, but looking at independent testing. And I assume this literature review would be comprehensive too, to look at other places in the country where this is happening. And it might even include phosphorus. I'm not 100% sure about that, but I know there's definitely going to be a focus on alternative treatment for nitrogen removal, and it will include load reductions.
Great, thank you.
Gretchen, can I just pile on one more thing?
Please do.
So the septic area or the load reduction from wastewater is probably the weakest part of PTAP. So it'll be good to have those numbers. And I just wanted to throw it out there. If anybody's doing a sewering project, meaning you'll be, at some point you'll be taking large areas off of septic and putting them onto sewer. We'd love to work with you. Yeah, because we need to really bone up on that part so that we can account for.
You want it to go into PTAP?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, we can tell it, Greg.
Yeah.
Got lots of.
Right.
Yeah.
And we need to develop some consensus on what the load reduction is and how.
I'm gonna hand it to Zach.
I think that needs to be reported in the permit anyway.
Yeah, it's getting reported in the separate info that we're putting together, but he's right, it
Yeah.
doesn't sit nicely into P10
And
right
who's
now.
working? Zach.
Zach Cronin, our engineer, is
Okay.
doing a big project off of Sagamore Ave where
Yeah.
30 houses right now onto
So it's an interesting
pressure.
modeling perspective because you're essentially taking waste from non-point source, putting it into point source. So there's some accounting there, and there's a load reduction.
There's a lot of counting too, because that's the only thing that you can increase your load, allocated load for, is doing that type of work. Yeah. That's beyond
Your
PTAP,
whole load. Yeah.
Yeah, your whole load, that's it, there's a little bit of a potential. I don't think anyone's probably gonna need it, but anyway. Cool. Katie, you had something, and then I'm gonna.
Sure.
Add some stuff.
So on another note, the congressional funded project, congressionally funded project. We've just received from UNH, from Project Lead, Dave Burden, the first request for the first year's worth of funding. I presume since the group already reviewed the actual project budget, that we can go forward and process them and put it out there in case somebody wanted the opportunity to review the request before we process the disbursement. Otherwise, we'll go forward and process the disbursement so they can get started.
I guess in follow-up to that, did we ever do an official press release announcing this? And I know for a long time we were kind of waiting to make sure the money actually arrived, and I just don't remember MAM as a group saying, hey, good job, here's what we got, and this is what it's going to achieve in terms of investment. So maybe we should
Yeah, I like that.
do that if we're ready to actually disperse.
Yeah.
This might be the time to work on that. I would not be the person to draft that.
No, you know what? Well, Katie, maybe you and I can work offline. We've got some media services guys that are really good at things like that, if you want to work. And I know you do too. So, yeah, we'll draft something up.
Just thinking good timing if we're about to.
Yeah, totally.
Disperse.
So will that be at the December meeting, the press release, or you sending it out?
I would
quick,
probably just do it unless you want to bring it to.
asking how it's gonna
Yeah.
flow, so that somebody asked me, hey, I have an idea.
Yeah,
you send an email, it's out there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
You
totally.
know, so somebody, say in Newington says,
Yeah.
hey, that's pretty good.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't look dumb,
Yeah,
I can do that myself.
yeah. I hear ya. I hear you. All right, cool. Yeah, we'll do that. I'll make sure everyone sees it. Yeah, Melissa.
The PR consultant may suggest that you might wanna, think about the broader story.
Yeah, I know.
But this is really about these communities working together to develop
I know.
stewardship in a fundamental way, and that's,
Thank you.
that's a good story.
I know, it
Thank
is a
you.
big story, but it's a good time to tell it. So,
But this could be a specific
Right.
example, but I think there are many examples.
Maybe we need to follow up too. All right, we'll work on that. You're right.
Couldn't help myself.
mhm. So the boat's out of the water, we can do like another trip around the.
Just, yeah, yeah.
All right, yeah,
Oh, yeah, sure.
I like that. We'll do that. One other really cool thing that's going on that a lot of people at the table are part of, and Melissa and Jamie and Sally I'm working with, but the Great Bay 2030 funding, that work continues, and I've never seen anything like it. Right, so I get to go on Wednesday and pitch cool ideas
Right.
to maybe get funded, like the, collaborative sweeper, and it would be, right now, we're talking about doing what, I don't have the numbers for me, but 125,000 to do kind of remember all those questions that came up that we didn't really have answers to really kind of dive into what those answers are, how street sweeping across all the communities could work. And then Melissa's project that she's doing with the stakeholders on the septic retrofits in the communities, and really looking at how it all works and how it's really going to be impacted. We're looking for a match for that, kind of a 50-50 match, so it's kind of doubling the cost and taking that project a bit further. But it's just cool, really cool, but not a lot of hoops to jump through, I guess. There's a board that we present to, a steering committee that we present to. There's funding over a number of years, but anyway, so stay tuned with that. Exciting stuff. I think there's just a lot of cool things going on out there. And then I don't know if you guys want to talk about your stormwater utility discussion, or Jamie, do you have anything to add? You guys did a great job. So.
Yeah, we presented to a work session of council a couple weeks ago now, and working towards a proposal to develop a stormwater utility for the city, similar to what Dover has been working on, in other communities, so it's nothing groundbreaking as far as the model of it, but it's, so we're moving forward as trying to come up with.
Can you
Executing that.
disclose what your estimated annual kind of income would need to be?
It's what, close to 2 million. Yeah, just under that. That's the number we're working on.
The presentation is online.
Okay,
Yes.
And
great.
it was very well received, by and large, by the city councilors, so we are moving
Yeah.
ahead to take it the next step, having gotten a number of questions. So we're kind of teeing up those answers, and we'll be going back to the city council with some decision points in terms of things like credits and different structures, but I'd say it was very well received by and large. And
In your estimate, I can ask you offline, but did you include like flood resiliency stuff, or was it really just stormwater stuff?
No, both, yeah.
Both.
Yeah.
And then
Small, yeah.
did you break out the way, like, street reconstruction projects? Did you break out the the stormwater portions of like an Islington Street project or whatever? Capital projects like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
a little bit.
yeah.
I didn't really look into your numbers. I was
Yeah.
just curious. Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, there's look at our, existing capital improvement plans.
Yeah.
and pulling those numbers out.
Cool.
Is final acceptance of that, is that subject to town or city residents voting on it? I mean, or is that something that would be done at the council, by the council?
the city council would adopt the necessary ordinances to implement that.
And that's the case in Dover as well.
Yeah, I was curious because I think I remember in Portland, Maine. I think there are other examples too where it requires sometimes a town meeting vote and there adequate sort of public outreach and sort of building public understanding of what it's for can lead to it not being adopted, but in this case, probably a lot of publicity about it.
A reasonable amount of publicity, but we're just beginning, shall we say, more of that conversation, but I think, you know, we've been very clear, this is really about equity. You know, it's just the proper division, if you will, of the responsibility for the stormwater costs. And,
Yeah, and it's, you know, reallocation of funds from, pulling it out of your tax base and putting it into the utility. And it's not, we've shown that actually for the individual resident, essentially a reduction in their costs is referring to the larger impervious, covered properties. Great.
I can add that Rochester's work team, our committee essentially, just had their first meeting. And so that will be ramping up over the coming months through that process. And just getting started a little earlier in the process, but moving forward.
Great. All right. Anything else? Any Exeter news you want to share or anything?
At this time.
All right.
December will be my last meeting.
Okay, so speaking of that, December will be the last meeting. I think Jennifer says she's leaving in December, so earlier in December, let's try and get something on the books and stick to it. All right. I don't think we need a ton of time. I feel comfortable kind of turning this around. So
December 6th.
yeah, I'm good, December 6th.
So I am about to, starting this week, negotiate 8 collective bargaining agreements.
Yay.
And the 6th, I will be in negotiation.
Okay.
But
Is there a day that week that might work for you?
let's see, the 8th is the prep state of the estuaries.
No.
Or is that old still?
I guess
Or is
we'll
it
do,
spring? Okay,
What's to June second?
It's still on my-
Mark your calendar, June second.
yeah, that's correct. I don't know, I still have.
I do too.
7th and 8th.
Katie, can we go see that new DPW?
Yes, yeah, we can host in the facility. We've had some streaming issues at that location with Zoom trainings, but I think that's been resolved, so I can confirm that, but we could host either way and then I could finalize the
Okay.
location.
Sounds good.
Wednesday morning.
Yeah, you want to do
Seventh.
7th, morning of the 7th? New appointment. What time are you guys thinking?
I need to be back in Portsmouth by noon-ish.
We do like 9 o'clock?
What
Does
day?
that work? Wednesday, the 7th at 9 in Rochester.
I'll be away, but no.
You sure?
Yeah.
Should check with Milton.
All right,
Close for
let's-
since it's a members meeting.
that's a good point.
That would be one. Pick another day.
Yeah,
I could also do Thursday morning. Portsmouth at 11, so stuff by that still gives us.
okay, 9 o'clock. We can either do the 7th or 8th in Rochester. Cool. All right, thank you all. Then if we have anything else? Motion to adjourn? Anyone?
And to adjourn.
Dan, yeah. Second,
Second.
Dennis, all right, all those in favor? Aye.
Maybe the
That's
person
unanimous.
taking my spot
Will come?
will